Hi, it's Kathy here at Art Zone, and I'm going to work with you through our Hippity Hoppity Easter carrot painting. So, in your painting kit, you will find a stencil for the carrot. You'll notice this stencil has parts that I have blocked off with this paper, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. You should have at least one dauber. You might have two. Doesn't matter, it will work just fine. And then a variety of paintbrushes. So we're gonna start today by painting our background. And in this one, our background was yellow. So I'm gonna paint the whole canvas yellow. Please remember, when painting canvases, I'm gonna be painting on paper. So my paper is flat, it doesn't have any edges, but a canvas is going to have edges. Now this one, our example today, is actually done on what's called a canvas board. So it's quite a bit thicker than paper, but not as thick as canvas. You can see it does have edges just a bit. I like to paint my edges. I don't like to leave them unpainted. That's every artist's choice there. So I always encourage you that when you are painting, take that paint, wrap it around and cover up the edge of your canvas. We are using an acrylic paint. We'll go ahead and load up your paintbrush and use really big brush strokes all the way across. Make sure and spread that paint out. You don't want it globbed up anywhere. It takes a long time to dry when you get really thick areas of acrylic paint. The kind of acrylic paint we use, it is a thin paint. So I always tell people to make sure and do this first layer, this first color, do it twice. So the whole canvas, including your edges, you are going to paint it twice with whatever color you have chosen as the background. But you have to let it dry. You have to let it dry in between layers. So once you paint that whole canvas yellow once, it needs to dry. Maybe you'll let it dry for about 15 minutes, come back to it, do your second layer of yellow. Once again, you're gonna have to let it dry about 15 minutes. You can use a blow dryer. With a blow dryer, you have to be careful. Don't set your blow dryer on super hot. If you can put it on cold, that's better. And don't turn it really high. If you can put it on a low to a medium, that's also better. The problem with the blow dryer is that it's going to dry the top layer of your paint, but it's not going to be able to dry that bottom layer. And that's going to cause your paint to crack because the top is dry, but the bottom is not. So we do use blow dryers, but if you've got time, just let it dry. So you've painted it yellow once, let it dry, come back, paint it yellow that second time. I'm gonna go ahead and go on to the next step because I have my painting already ready in the next phase over here that I'll put over this. So it's okay if I continue painting even though my paint is wet. I'm gonna go ahead and put this paintbrush in water. I don't need it right now. The second part of our painting are the dots behind the carrot. I like to do the dots before I do the carrot because if I put my carrot on and then I add my dots, a lot of times you won't get any dots going underneath the carrot, creating some overlapping. And then it doesn't look like an overall patterned background. Instead, it starts to look kind of haloed. And looking at this particular carrot on mine, I would say I might have done that. I may have put the carrot on and then added dots. And that's not the way I like to do it. So I'm gonna take my dauber. I make so many paintings here at the art studio. I'm also a teacher. I make a lot of painting examples. I forget what I do half the time. When I get some paint on my dauber, you see how there's some clumps of paint there? We really don't want that. So I'm gonna take that paint. If you've got a paper towel beside you, you could just sponge down on that. Don't push really hard on your dauber. All that's doing is getting a bunch of paint stuck into the sponge, and that's not really necessary. So now I've got it a little more even, and I'm ready to start adding my dots. If your yellow is not dry, when you go to add these dots, it's either going to mix with the yellow, making a new color, or it's gonna pull some of the yellow off, and then it's gonna look a little messy. So I'm gonna take this and just lightly rock it back and forth to get my dots. Now, if your dauber doesn't leave a perfect circle, it's okay. You can either leave it like that if you don't mind it, or once it dries, it does need to dry, then take one of your smaller paintbrushes and kind of fix the spot where maybe it didn't do the full circle. I'm actually just going to leave mine for the time being and go around. Remember not to get too much paint on that dauber. I like it when the circles go off the edge of the page. You might want to have newspaper underneath your canvas so you don't get paint on your tables if that's a worry for you. If I push too hard on my dauber, it's not going to be a circle in the end. You just want to lightly press it down. You add as many dots to your background as you want. It could be a lot of dots or it could be a few. When you are done, we can go ahead and clean this dauber out. If you only have one dauber, we're going to need it again. So when you go to clean it out in the water, really make sure and press it down, get that paint out of it, but then we're going to need to dry this. Being nice to your daubers. So I pick it up, I squeeze all that water out, and then I'll take my towel and really make sure to dry that water out so that we can reuse that dauber. If you have a second dauber, then just set this one to the side after you've cleaned it so that you can go ahead and use it. I'm going to put up a dry painting over my wet one so that we can continue and we don't have to wait for my painting to dry. If you have just put your dots on, you're going to need to let them dry before you go on to add your carrot. Your next part, you are going to want your stencil. I'm getting tape ready because I'm going to need to tape my stencil up onto my canvas. You can see I have taken a piece of paper and I have taped over this part of my carrot. I'm going to send a little message out to Laura right now. She's in the other room. She's on the pottery wheel. Hey, Laura, they're here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to put this right here. You could center it. You could tilt it. You can see in my example, it's kind of slightly tilted. Maybe in this one, I'll take it. The paper's a little too long, so I'm taking it over more. Maybe in this one, I'll really tilt it all the way to the side. I like seeing how I change paintings each time I do them. As I told you earlier, I'm an art teacher. So I see 25 different classes a week, over 500 kids. So when I'm doing paintings with them, I usually have to make a painting several times. And I like to change it up each time just a little. Okay, so with our dauber, we are now going to go into our orange. Once again, you don't want that paint to be globbed up, so take it, tap it around, get that paint a little more even. And we'll start tapping it on. If you push too hard or you've got your paint globbed up, it's going to go underneath your stencil. And you won't want that. Now, this might take more than one layer of orange to cover up any dots that are in the background. It's not really a big deal to have to cover up the yellow because yellow creates orange, right? So we don't have to worry about covering up that color. But then when you've got this dot that's in the background coming through, sometimes you have to add multiple layers on to cover those up. When you do that, you have to let your paint dry in between each layer. There we go. So I would let that dry. Take your stencil off when it is drying. You don't want your stencil to accidentally dry to your painting while you're doing that. Put your stencil back on, do a second layer, take it off, let it dry before you go on to your next steps. Now I'm gonna go ahead and just take off my paper that's been blocking the top part of my carrot. I'm gonna continue even though my paint is wet, because this is not a painting, the one I'm making right now. It's not one that I'm gonna keep. I already have my finished example, so it's okay if it doesn't do exactly what I would want it to do. I'm gonna set that to the side, and once again, you're gonna wanna clean that dauber out so we can work on the leaves that are up top. I already cleaned out my first dauber, so I'm just gonna switch. And I'm gonna start with my darker green. Don't get too much paint on there. Press that stencil down. And it's okay if you take a little bit of that green into your orange. We'll come back and play with that a little bit later. So now we have our carrot stenciled on. I'm going to take my stencil off. Stencils are reusable, so just set them to the side, let them dry. Ooh, ooh. My stencil started to move onto my painting. I'm going to set that to the side, let it dry. If your green wasn't dark enough and you want to do a second layer, you can do that. Just always let it dry in between. But we are moving on to our details. So if you look at the orange of the carrot, you can see that it has some lines added to it to kind of give it that more realistic carrot look. I did mine using black. You can play with yours. You could even add a little bit of shading into this carrot if you want. To do shading, I'm going to take a bigger brush, not super big, to make orange, yellow, and red, right? Well, I'm going to take some yellow, and then I'm going to touch some orange and kind of mix them together a little bit, and it's going to make a lighter orange than I'm already using. And I'm going to take it into one side of my carrot. I like to curve it because a carrot's not flat. So that wasn't done in my original painting. I didn't add any shading to it. I kept that one pretty simple. I'm just gonna take it down one side because if you're light, sunlight or the lights in your house, they're hitting it from one side and it's making it much lighter on this side. If you wanted this side on the other to be darker, you could use some red, add it in there, darken it up, or some brown. And of course you could always use black to darken some colors if you like. I like to try and use the colors that make them to darken and lighten things, so then it doesn't dull them out. Because sometimes if you use white and black, it kind of dulls your color out. So I'm cleaning my paintbrush out now so that I can switch to a finer detailed brush so that I can add the black outlines and the lines across that really kind of made it more realistic. Carrots, if you've ever seen them, they have these little deeper parts that go across, and I really try and go quick with my lines and not think too much on it about what they're doing. Adding some, going down. I try not to go back over my lines. Once a line is on there, I just want to leave it and ignore it. I don't want to do any more to it. A lot of times when you try and fix a line, you just make it worse. So, and then I'll come back and I'm getting yellow all over my arm from the edge. Then I'll come back and add my outline. I try not to make my outline too thick. I like it to be a little more choppy. And then you'll go up to your leaves. And once again, before I continue with my black, so I'm gonna set that down, I'm gonna add a little bit more color variation in there to make green, yellow, and blue. So once again, I'm gonna dip into my yellow, and I do have a lighter green over here. I'll dip into that lighter green, and I'm gonna add it into the leaves just kind of randomly. It's not even. Then I'll go into my darker green. I'm gonna add some into there. This is not one that you have to be real picky on. And then I'll be ready for my black again. And I'll add some outlining to it. Like I said, I try and be quick with my lines so that I've also done that to my circles, but if you look at these, it's not a perfect outline. The line breaks, the line's thick, the line's thin, and I achieve that by simply coming through and quickly adding a line here and there and not spending a bunch of time on it. And not going back and fixing things. Just let them be. They're random, it's okay. To add the words, once again, it was black with a detailed brush. Let your painting dry. Take a pencil, lightly write your words, because if you press too hard, you're gonna dent your canvas and then you can't erase and fix things. So lightly write your words and then go back over it with your black. Take your time on it, have some fun. If you want to add other things to this painting, it is yours, so have fun with it, and thank you for joining us.